May 15, 2008. A freakish pre-season heat wave sweeps across Northern California, shattering record highs, not by a few degrees, but by a dozen or more in several cities. 1 week later, high winds in the Santa Cruz Mountains whip up an early season wildfire that would claim more than 4,000 acres and 35 homes, a month before the Northern California fire season typically starts. June 4th. Governor Schwarzenegger declares an official statewide drought and orders emergency transfers of water to the most stricken areas. Current science cannot establish a certain link between these events and climate change. What scientists can say with a mix of confidence and trepidation is that these events do provide a glimpse of California's future as the climate warms.
I think the world of 2050 is already in the pipeline. There's a lot of pain coming, and the question is if we're going to be smart enough to avoid the worst of it.
Regardless of where you stand on the cause, there is now no doubt that our climate is changing. And recent data suggests that it's happening faster than scientists had predicted. In the next half hour, we'll examine just some of these changes and the ways in which they're turning up the heat on California.
It is late February, and just as he's done for nearly 30 years, Frank Gerke is trudging out to his regular spot near Tamarack Flat, just off Highway 50. It's one of several snow courses that the state's Department of Water Resources tracks every winter for snowfall and water content.
The way we do water supply forecasting, it's an index method. You've measured the snow parameters at various spots in the watershed, and you relate those measurements to the outflow from the basin.
It's crucial data because 40% of California's surface water originates up here in the frozen reservoir known simply as the snowpack. On this day, Gerke's usual partner was off on other assignments, so I thought I'd fill in.
Not there. Not there.
Or fall in.
Didn't get you in time. Okay.
I have a feeling he could have worked faster alone.
Sorry about that. No problem. This course, I think, was established right around 1941, so we've got quite a long record. We're going to start from here. We'll measure up 50 feet in the direction of that orange sign.
Okay.
Take our first sample, repeat the process.
This is the low-tech method, dating back about 100 years. The basic gear includes a hollow aluminum pole with a sawtooth end and a scale. The pole provides a core sample of the snowpack. Today we're standing on about 7 feet of accumulation.
79 inches.
79 inches.
Snow can pile up in the Sierra. By late February, this seasonal home is buried up to the second story.
And of course, it's not just as simple as how much snow is on the ground, it's how much water is in the snow. If you carve out, let's say, just kind of a random square foot of snow, looks about right, this could be anywhere from 50% water density all the way down to 1%. This snow we're dealing with here on this day is about 33%. Makes a big difference.
30 inches of water content.
Since wet snow is heavier snow, the scale and conversion charts calculate the water content.
The first snow surveys were made basically just over the ridge from where we are now, over on Mount Rose. First one was made in 1906, and if you're looking at any kind of a climate change scenario, that's the key. As far back as you can with a consistent methodology on data collection is absolutely critical.
On this day in February, the survey showed a healthy snowpack, and then it stopped snowing, or raining. And by the last survey in May, the critical water content measurement was at only 2/3 of normal.
Now, as long as you have snow falling on snow, the whole arrangement has a way of holding together pretty nicely until spring, when it gradually melts off and runs off into the rivers and streams below. But now, let's introduce some rain to the equation. If you have spring arriving sooner and warmer winters overall, that means more precipitation falling up in the mountains in the form of rain. Well, when rain falls on snow, you can see the snow still has some holding power, but it's melting. Even worse, you've got more bare ground at upper elevations. Look what happens. There's nothing to stop that water from just running off. Again, rain on snow, rain on bare ground. Problem.
In 2007, using 50 years of data, scientists confirmed that mountains across the West, not just the Sierra, are getting more rain and less snow, that snowpack is melting faster and streams drying up sooner, and that rapid climate change is the best explanation.
It does seem that snowmelt is occurring earlier. There are records in Yosemite comparing the date of snowmelt now versus 20 years ago, and it's about 2 weeks earlier. 2 weeks doesn't sound like a big deal, but California doesn't get rain in the summertime.
Recent studies suggest that California is already warming faster than the world as a whole. According to state projections, average temperatures in California could rise anywhere from 3 to more than 10 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of this century, depending on how aggressively we reduce the so-called greenhouse gases that cause global warming.
It doesn't matter much what we do for 2030 or 2040 or 2050. I think we're committed already to the climate changes that are going to have a significant impact in those years.
Peter Glick directs the Pacific Institute in Oakland, a policy think tank devoted largely to water issues.
That's not to say we shouldn't do enormous things now to reduce the impacts even further out, but we're already committed to a lot of climate change.
The signs are already there. Studies show that the harbingers of spring are arriving earlier. Plants blooming. Insects appearing. Some migratory birds are arriving earlier in the spring and leaving later in the fall.
There are 3 things we're very sure about. One is it's going to be a lot hotter. The second is we're going to see changes in the timing of water availability because of the impacts on mountain snow. And the third is sea level rise, which will have an impact inland in the wetlands area in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. I think all of those things are certain.
And they add up to a bewildering stew of apparent contradictions. In the high country, ski areas will be strapped for their basic stock and trade, snow. Even the most conservative warming estimates shave a full month off the ski season at middle elevations by 2100. In the valley below, the threat of more frequent wintertime flooding increases, even as Californians endure more sustained and severe droughts in summer.
These are almonds, right?
Yes, this is
Or almonds, as you say up here.
almonds, we say here. Yeah, this looks like a pretty good set. You can see the nuts are starting to form here.
Mary Wells wants to know that the young trees she's planted here in the Colusa Basin will have enough water to yield almonds and profits for decades into the future.
Most of us have come from a long line of farming families. We're very tuned in to nature, and we know it has its cycles. Hard for me to believe that man causes all of them, but I think the significant thing here is that we understand we need the flexibility to deal with it.
That's why, amazing as it sounds, Mary is in favor of a plan that would put her own home ranch just over the hill under more than 200 feet of water. This is the hamlet of Sites, a few miles west of Maxwell. For 36 years, it's been home to Mary Wells and her family.
So this is the back, what, more than 40, I think.
Yes, we actually sit right in the middle of 250 acres.
Oh, okay.
Right here's just about the middle of the ranch.
Okay.
They own one of several working ranches in the Antelope Valley, 14,000 acres that would disappear underwater to form California's first brand new dam and reservoir project in decades.
And they would flood the entire valley?
That's correct. It's basically a natural bowl. It's 15 miles from one end of it to the northern end. Over here, you can see the oak tree line kind of all the way across the valley. It's about that high. That's exactly where the water would be.
You can see how an engineer would look at this valley and see a reservoir. It forms almost a perfectly natural bowl. As a matter of fact, if you look down the road, the way these two hills come together behind me and form a V, it's almost like there's a sign hanging up above it that says, "Insert dam here."
While I really love this ranch, raised my children here, have grandchildren that come here now. I also come from a long-time agriculture family, and I see a huge threat to the existence of agriculture in the North State if we don't get some off-stream storage or do something about an additional supply.
Off-stream storage is the idea of creating a reservoir without damming up more rivers. This part of the Antelope Valley would be a kind of remote holding tank, storing as much as 1.8 million acre-feet of water. That's enough to supply all the homes in Sacramento for 4 years.
Of course, all the water for that would have to come from someplace, and the someplace would most likely be here. This is one of a couple of major irrigation canals that happens to run within a few miles of sites, but on the wrong side of the hill. This water starts in the Sacramento River, so someplace near here would have to be pumped again up over those hills behind me into Antelope Valley.
Environmental groups have opposed the new dams, which are part of a larger plan to create this new reservoir and expand 2 more farther down the Central Valley. About 120 air miles south of the Wells Ranch, John Fiscalini's fate is also tied to the land. His family has been in the dairy business on the same land outside Modesto since 1914. Today they have 1,500 milking cows, each of which gives up to 90 pounds of milk per day.
These cows are much more productive than cows in most other countries, and at the same time there's a whole lot less greenhouse gas emission per pound of milk produced in the United States because of our efficiency.
Fiscalini also runs an award-winning cheese operation. There's a huge investment and several generations of tradition at stake here. But facing potential water shortages and oppressive heat that could threaten his herd in years to come, there's one thing that John Fiscalini fears more than rapid climate change itself.
One of the biggest concerns is legislation. What government agencies are going to tell us we must do and how we must conform our businesses.
Fiscalini is trying to keep ahead of the curve. When we visited here, he'd already sunk more than $3 million into a massive methane digester. Methane gas is the other high-volume product produced by John's herd. Researchers and regulators are starting to look more closely at methane. Though our economy as a whole produces far more carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas, methane is 25 times more potent than CO2. John hopes to harness that methane for the farm, reducing its greenhouse gas emissions at the same time.
So we think where we're going with this is certainly going to be a beneficial thing in a multitude of ways. Not only is it going to hopefully help greenhouse gas emissions, it's also supposed to be profitable for us to make renewable energy on site here, use that energy, and then give some of that energy, or sell some of that energy back to the grid.
Supposedly.
Supposedly, yeah.
Once it's up and running, this system will literally feed on itself. They'll use methane to heat up water, which will then be circulated through all of this tubing, which spirals around the entire tank. That'll promote the digestive process, so to speak. They'll make more methane, send it back to the generator, and power the entire operation.
Fiscalini is concerned that by the time his digester is ready to gulp down its first load of manure, the environmental targets and the rules may all be different. Farmers throughout the state share his concern. Cynthia Corey is a Sacramento lobbyist for California's farmers and ranchers.
People are talking about it at a federal level. We're going to have national climate change policy. We might need to figure out a new way of regulating that's not taking a 1970 framework and trying to bring it into this century with this whole new concept.
California has moved forward with its own framework, the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006, known by its legislative shorthand AB 32. It gives force of law to an ambitious goal, rolling back greenhouse gas emissions to 1990 levels by 2020.
These are things that have come in so quickly that I haven't even had a chance to put them in here.
All climate change.
State, federal, local, background science, trees, legislation, CEQA, just enormous. There's so many aspects to this, it's hard to even keep up with.
It's the tail wagging the dog these days.
Larry Green heads the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District. He's part of a brigade of state, local, and regional managers who will be responsible for implementing the nation's most sweeping counterattack on climate change.
Lights, the car you drive, how you live your life, many different aspects of our lives are associated with climate change greenhouse gases.
Green is hoping that mitigation efforts in the years ahead will strike a balance between incentives and regulation, between the voluntary and the mandatory.
At some point we may get to have to say, well, everybody has to use fluorescent lights, or maybe all businesses have to have vehicles that meet a certain vehicle emission standard. We'll just have to see how that plays out over time. But the more people do and the more innovative we are in the early years, the less impact we'll have in the later years for regulatory things that we have to do.
There are some very difficult choices to make, and the interconnectedness of the region, it's just like a living organism.
Mike McKeever heads the Sacramento Area Council of Governments, where climate change has taken center stage, and with it, a commitment to reverse California's legendary urban sprawl.
You can't separate out the housing from the transportation, from the floodplains and the watersheds and the airsheds. The whole thing functions as a unit.
Passenger cars are the single biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions in California. But the state's Air Resources Board can now require that new development plans be designed to minimize car travel and bring homes closer to work and public transit.
We've looked out at the land use patterns and the travel patterns. If we don't grow differently in the future than we have in the past, and if we don't transport ourselves differently in the future than we have in the past, we don't have a functional region. It really is that simple.
As development pushes farther into the foothills, it poses another risk: wildfires. In June, after an especially dry spring, lightning triggered 1,000 fires in one weekend, mostly in Northern California. Climatologists say that a 1-degree increase in the average temperature can produce 10 times the number of lightning strikes. Couple that with generally hotter, drier summers, and the future looks highly combustible.
We've had in the last 10 years probably 7 of the hottest, driest years over the last 100 years have occurred in the last decade.
I took a walk through a fresh burn zone in the Sierra with Crawford Tuttle, Chief Deputy Director at CAL FIRE, the new name for the State Department of Forestry's firefighting unit.
This is pretty much what we're talking about right here, I guess.
It certainly is, Craig. What you see before you here is a very hot, damaging fire that occurred in the middle of the month of May, about 2.5 or 3 months earlier than it would in any given typical year, fire year, which is a great demonstration of how fire regime, fire severity is expanding in California. What you see here is a fire condition that burned very hot. You can look at how the vegetation burned all the way up into the canopy here. So you see the top of these trees here that were burned. And this is an example of a catastrophic fire where there won't be anything left from this fire. You'll end up with bare ground. If you look down here, you can see that there was some soil burn severity, so much of the soil has been burned as well.
This is, to some extent, the future.
Most certainly is, if we, given the trends that we're seeing now.
Forests are one of our most effective filters for keeping carbon out of the atmosphere. But that carbon is released when they burn, or more gradually when they die from insect invasion or any cause. Scientists are now concerned that some of our most troubled forests will become net emitters of carbon instead of net holders, helping accelerate climate change rather than slow it down. Tuttle says part of the answer is aggressive reforestation after major fires.
If you see behind us here, that's what the stand used to look like before the fire. And as we walk through here, what you're seeing is, without any reforestation activity, the brush are outcompeting the trees.
Okay.
And therefore, from a carbon standpoint, you're not seeing carbon return to this this footprint as quickly as it might. This is an area that may not return to forest for over 50 to 100 years, given its makeup now, and in fact could burn again before you have an opportunity for reforestation to occur here.
Perhaps some answers can be found back where this story began, in the increasingly precious Sierra snows. It's critical that we know more about the forces that affect the mountain snowpack and how much water it yields. That's the goal of the Mountain Hydrology Group, led by scientists from UC Merced, like Martha Conklin.
What we need to do is develop some new technology, spot measurements, that give us a better idea of how much snow has fallen, and then we'll know what's going to be there in the spring when it melts.
Teams have been installing networks of ground-based sensors in key Sierra locations, like this one near the giant trees forest of Sequoia National Park. It's a challenge to set up and maintain sensitive electronic instruments in an extremely harsh mountain environment. Scientists have to be part handyman, part mountain goat. There are more than 200 sensors already working in this one basin.
Well, I've got a problem with the power coming to this site.
I just don't think we get enough solar radiation here.
Right.
Power that battery.
Right.
We might need to relocate that panel this summer.
Yeah.
Get it up higher.
Well, it's what we have for now. Let's see if I've got any data coming in.
That data will form a first-ever map of indicators like soil temperature and moisture, solar radiation and snow depth, even stream flow underneath the snow.
That instrument right there that's hanging off the tower to the left is an ultrasonic snow depth sensor. Sometimes we call them pingers.
These scattered observatories make up a kind of woods-wide web that's already feeding new snowfall data to the Department of Water Resources, and more is on the way.
And the problem that we have right now is that we don't really understand the cycles and the timing and the distribution and amount of water that we're going to get from snowpack in the mountains. The cycling of water through the soil, within the streams, and when we can expect runoff to occur. Those are critical tools that water managers will need and can use in the future.
If you're trekking around out here, you might come across something that looks like a walkie-talkie hanging from a tree. But it's a relay, gathering data from the hydrologic stations up on the mountain, and then sending them over to a base station computer nearby, which the researchers can access right from their own labs down in the valley.
They'll take those readings and combine them with data from NASA's Aquas satellite, which can measure snow cover over much wider areas.
One of the things that we're trying to quantify in here and understand better is how much of the area is covered with snow, because it's difficult with a satellite to look underneath these trees.
What's happening in the snowpack will affect more than our water supply. As more snow shifts to rain in the upper elevations, plants and trees will have to adjust or die.
We should expect that lower elevation trees will be moving up higher, and some of the trees that we associate with higher elevations might be dying off. They're wet during the rain event, but they dry out much sooner. So trees and other plants that we're expecting to have water longer won't be able to get that. So we should expect to see major ecosystem shifts that occur.
Major political shifts will occur as well. Polls show that for the first time in decades, Californians may be ready for a return to nuclear power, because for all its controversy, it is a carbon-free source of energy.
We might need some bridge technologies to get to the sustainable future. It might even include nuclear power. It is not a clean technology, but it's not perhaps as bad a carbon burning technology as coal burning. So we have to make some hard choices.
Restrictions on water use will likely become more common in cities and suburbs, and climate change will become a major public health issue, especially in the Central Valley.
If you look at smog alerts and you look at temperature, high temperature and bad smog come hand in hand. And the modelers are already telling us that higher temperatures in the Central Valley are going to lead to much more frequent smog days, much more asthma, much more deterioration of our air quality.
And if you think interior California would be insulated from rising sea levels, think again. As saltwater advances up the Sacramento River, much of the Delta's productive farmland would be reclaimed by salt marshes, return to the way they were in millennia long past. Kim Stanley Robinson thinks about the future every day. He's best known for his Mars trilogy of science fiction novels, but he's also written a series of books that lay out a grim future with unchecked global warming. But lately, he's been focusing on the future of his own planet and his home state.
You can't be an across-the-board optimist, and you cannot be complacent at this moment. That would be the last thing to do. There's no room for complacency, because really this is the biggest environmental challenge yet.
Everybody we spoke to for this program agreed on one thing, that we need to prepare now.
Some of the things we're doing as far as designing our communities the way we do business, we're making decisions today that are going to be on the ground in 50 years, 40 years, and we need to be very serious in thinking about how we do that.
I'm a Californian and I love California. It's one of the most beautiful landscapes in the entire world, and we don't want to wreck it for our children. And so we got to do these things.
I think we know how. I don't think it involves inventing new technology. And maybe we'll get our act together in time to prevent the worst consequences.
To order a DVD copy of this program, call 888-814-3923 or visit kvie.org/viewfinder.